Good afternoon, everyone. If you're as hungry as I am, I couldn't possibly have your attention. So I'm going to debase myself by telling a reasonably embarrassing story from my past, just to get you back inside. About 13 years ago, I was in CIT studying for my degree. And during that time, there was a rag week, one particular week, where there was a hypnotist in town. And I, being the fool that I am, decided I was going to volunteer for this hypnotist to see what he could do with me and see if I was maybe somewhat immune to it. I wasn't. Part of the thing that went on that day was people were brought up on stage and they made various fools of themselves in different ways. But one of the things we were asked to do at one stage was to tell a story. And this story was to be a complete lie, right? But we were to tell it very convincingly. The fact that it was to be a complete lie has been forgotten. Okay, so many people told stories about famous celebrities that they'd met and that they had slept with and so on. And I, for some reason, which I still don't understand, decided to tell a story about some inappropriate relationships with farmyard animals. And this is a thing that you can't really shake off all that easily. I became known, rather unfortunately, for a while as the sheep guy. I was in America about a year after it in a bar in New Jersey when someone came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around and I was like, "You're the sheep guy." It's the type of thing that I suppose you don't like to dwell on. But the reason why I mention it at all today is I'm beginning to do a lot of talking about suicide and that kind of thing, and suddenly I've become that guy, that suicide guy. And what I'm hoping that today, in what I'm chatting about, that you'll be able to draw some little of inspiration from some of the things I'm going to talk about. It's not all necessarily doom and gloom. There's a lot of positivity that we can draw upon as a people as well. Samaritans is an organisation most people would have heard of in some way or other. Maybe not everyone fully understands what it's about, but essentially we provide confidential emotional support to people going through distress. The organisation was founded essentially because a 13-year-old girl died. She died 60 years ago, in my mind, from fear and ignorance. She was 13 years old, she had her first period, and she didn't know what was happening to her. She thought she was possessed, and she took her own life. And it is from that Samaritans evolved into the organisation that it is today. 500,000 calls we took last year in this country. We're as busy as we've ever been. But it's impossible to talk about suicide in this country without talking to people who want to solve it, who want to fix it. And I can understand that. It has devastated so many communities. It has destroyed so many lives that you absolutely would want to fix it. And I'm reminded of an episode of The West Wing, which you may be familiar with, where Martin Sheen, who played President Jed Bartlett, was faced with a personal crisis in which he felt ineffective. So to compensate for it, he decided he was going to launch a plan to cure cancer within 10 years. He opined, we got man on the moon when no one thought that was possible. So I often think about suicide in those terms, and though this is somewhat deflating, I actually don't think it's the same kind of thing. And I'll tell you why. When we talk about cancer and curing cancer, what we're really talking about is science. And you can lock 100 or 1,000 scientists into a room and give them enough time and money, and they'll probably come up with a cure for whatever it is you're looking for. If you were to take the same approach with suicide, you would have to lock the 7 billion of us up into a room, because it will take the 7 billion of us to change, and not just to act or to react, but to actually change. And that's quite hard. But there are things that we can do short of that. When we talk about suicide, again, we often talk about mental illness. And there's no doubt a lot of people who die by suicide have mental illnesses. And again, there's no doubt that we need to pay attention to that. However, there are a lot of people who die by suicide who don't have mental illnesses. And I think it's important to draw that distinction. Just drawing upon my own personal situation, I'm thinking back to a time maybe 15 or 16 years ago. I was gay. Well, I still am actually, in fact, didn't wear off. And I was finding it very difficult at that point in time. I'd be damned then or now if anyone told me I had a mental illness, but I absolutely, definitely needed support. And that was support that could have brought me from a place of risk to a place of safeness. And luckily, I was able to find that within my own life. The other thing about talking about mental health is that it's very much out there. That's you. I don't have any mental health problems. When we start talking about instead emotional health, I think it brings us back into us. And I think that's really important. It moves it from the head to the heart. And that's actually where we're much more effective at dealing with problems in my mind. That's much more open really than the mind, because the mind has been poisoned a lot of the time. We have a tendency to over-intellectualize mental health and emotional health, and to over-intellectualize sadness and those kind of issues. There are other issues as well around suicide that I could talk about for quite some time, but the one I want to focus in on is intolerance. I think it's a thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. Now, I consider myself a very tolerant person. I go to work every day in Waterford, and I treat them as if they were Cork people. That is not easy to do. I do all right as I go over Yall Bridge, kind of invoke the gods that I won't catch a Waterford accent, which is an affliction, is the only word to describe it. I mightn't have a job Monday morning. But it is a thing that's really important. And I suppose I've been very lucky in life. I've met some exceptionally inspirational people. And many of those inspirational people were people I met at 3 o'clock in the morning at the other end of a phone to whom I cannot attach a name. People who endured what to me seems absolutely unendurable. People who have hit the bottom of the barrel for a variety of reasons and are still looking to the top to see how they can get out. People who've skirted with the notion that their lives are not worth living, but are still willing to get up the next morning and face the day in the hope that it'll be better. And I can tell you something, you can learn a lot from people in that place and time. And some of these things won't surprise you. You'll know that depression hurts like hell, and that grief can rip you asunder, and that regret has absolutely got no pair. But what you mightn't have expected is that a lot of what contributes to people's difficulties are not the intrinsic things always, but sometimes the extrinsic stuff, the other people. Not all other people, but some other people, and their behavior and their attitudes. And it's easy to lose sight of that. We often comment on the fact that people don't talk anymore. We're a nation of talkers, but we don't really talk about the important stuff. And I wonder, do we ever actually ask why? And sometimes we'll think back to the historical reasons around the church and maybe the history of being occupied and so on, and that is maybe part of it. But there's also something about society that I think we have to question. Do we provide an environment that's conducive to people talking about important stuff without fear? And I'm not 100% certain that we do. Do we as individuals and as a collective society do things that push people back, that say to them, you're different from me, you're not the same, you need to watch yourself? No, not for you. And I think we do. And that to me is a problem that we need to overcome. And it's easy to reflect on all the progress we've made as a society, and it is absolutely warranted and true, but we still live in a city where, for example, 2 gay men can't walk down the main street safely, or at least feeling safe, even though they might be very much in love. We live in a city where if you hop into any taxi, there's more than a small chance you'll hear how all Nigerians are the same and that they're lazy and useless. We live in a city where in a schoolyard, a typical one, the word gay will be bandied around like an insult. Are we daft enough to assume that those things have got nothing to do with suicide? Are we daft enough to think that they're not reflected in the 600 people a year who die by suicide? Travellers, as was mentioned earlier, have an exceptionally high rate of suicide. Is it a coincidence that this is a group of people so exposed to hatred and vitriol that when we burn them out of their homes, like we did recently in Kilkenny, that it merits merely a murmur from the political establishment? These things are not separate from suicide. They are part of the problem, and they are part of society, and because they're part of society, they are our problem. And it's so easy to lose sight of that. One of the most inspirational people I met recently was a woman from the Midlands. She would be in her late 30s or maybe early 40s, and you have to be careful mentioning women's ages, but and it's on video and screwed. she was the mother of a 14-year-old transgendered boy. Her son had been born in the body of a girl. Now I can kind of see, even as I mentioned, that jars of people. It's something that's hard to imagine. And I know from talking to her, it was at an event I attended, that she resisted it so much initially. She questioned it. It turned her life upside down, as I'm sure you can imagine. But ultimately, she accepted it. She accepted that her daughter in her mind was now her son, and she calls him by his name. And it was just remarkable to see it, the openness with which she accepted her son. She is fighting battles for him that you or I can't really even imagine. Little things and big things, and she's doing it with gusto. And it is really just incredibly inspiring. But the thing that's easy to forget in all that acceptance is that acceptance is actually probably the difference between life and death. And it cuts the heart of so many areas of society, that difference of acceptance being more than just political niceties or political correctness or namby-pambyism or whatever you want to call it. It is about life and death very often. Again, I think it's easy to lose sight of the positive things that happen. We now live in a city that recently voted to endorse equal marriage. And while many people dismiss this as tokenism because it has no real effect, it does have an effect, because it says to people, you're a part of the city and you're the exact same as everyone else, regardless of who you love, and we're going to treat you the same. So whatever problems you encounter in life, this is one that you need not worry about. And that's a big thing. And it is not just political correctness. I'm going to leave you with just a final thought. And this is something that I'd ask you to take away and just to reflect on yourselves as over the weekend, maybe. But there was this old Cherokee Indian who was chatting with his grandson one day. And they were talking about matters of life and death and such things. And the old man said to the grandson, he said, there's within you 2 wolves who are fighting for control and domination of your heart. And one wolf is vicious and angry and vitriolic and nasty. And the other wolf is compassionate and understanding and kind and generous. And the little boy said, which wolf wins? The wolf that wins is the wolf that you feed. And it is as simple as that. If you feed prejudice, it will grow, and it is not separate or removed from suicide. Tolerance never costed a life. No one has ever had a heart attack because of too much compassion, but prejudice and intolerance have. And that's what we really need to think about in whatever city we live in. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.